Andrew from Ether Automation, and in this video, we're going to continue on with our ERP series for building your ERP in Zoho Creator for your manufacturing company. Now, in the last video, we pushed over purchase orders to Zoho Inventory, but in this video, we're going to be generating work orders. So now that we're pulling all that data back and forth between Zoho Inventory and the Creator app, we're going to be creating a work order and identifying what purchase orders we need to fulfill that work order and creating an assembly list. And we're going to talk about the pick list. And then we're going to use one of the functions that we've made in a previous video for when we create POs and push that back up to inventory. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Okay, so what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to make a new standalone function. Now, this standalone function is going to be notably complicated, notably complex, maybe not complicated, but definitely complex. We're going to call this generate work order. It's going to go default. The return type will be void. The arguments will be sales order ID, and that's going to be an int. Now, I'm going to start with some high-level understanding of what this architecture should be, just so you kind of get an idea of what we're doing here. So first, we're going to get the sales order. Then we're going to generate POs for items where we don't have enough to fulfill the order. Now, you may be saying, what does this have to do with work orders? You'll see in a second. All right, so now that we have the POs, we want to create work order line items. And then after that, we want to create pick list line items. Finally, we want to create the work order. And finally, we're going to do something called update the PO and sales order. So at a high level, what we're doing is we're getting the sales order, checking to see which items we don't have enough of, and then creating a purchase order for those items. And then once the purchase order is created, we're going to create the work order line items, create the pick list on the work order, and then we're going to create the work order. This seems fairly straightforward. However, it does kind of get a little weird. So right here, to generate the POs for items where we don't have enough, we need to do something a little more complex. So I'm going to copy and paste pseudocode in here to kind of explain what the heck is happening. So we're going to identify the products and the components that inventory is required. And we're going to create a product list that we want to add items we don't have enough of onto. And then for each of those products, right, we're going to see if we have enough inventory. And then we're going to get the distinct values for the vendors for the product list. As in, we're going to eventually going to create a PO for each of these vendors. So for each vendor, for each product, if it's a composite product, we calculate the number that we need for each item, and then we create a PO line item to fill the order. And then once we've gone through that for each product, for the vendor, we create the PO for the vendor, and we're going to push to Zoho Inventory. Now we have a standalone function for this, right? And that's what we did in a previous video. You can see that pop-up come out now. So down here, we want to create the work order line items. So in order to do that, again, it's a little more complicated. We want to, for each sales order line item, get product info, and then we want to get PO line item based on this string of text. Now, in our first few videos in this series, you may have remembered I specifically said, hey, the purchase order line item should be its own module, And this is why, because this sales order line item is used to kind of match those up. And this will be used so that when a purchase order is received, we can trigger a work order to be moved to production kind of thing. And then for the pick list items, we want to get the component items for all the products, calculate the quantity needed, and then we're going to create the work order. That's probably the most straightforward part of this. And then for updating the PO, we want to do something like this, where we are, for each PO line item, search for the work order line item with that PO line item, and then we update the PO line item. And this is because the purchase order line item has a work order line item associated with it. We want the data to be linked so that, as orders are shipped, or as orders are received, or as orders are assembled, we can track items from the PO they come from all the way through to the customer they're shipped to. All right? And this is why we do this. So it looks very complicated, and at a certain level it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to code out sections of this, and I'm going to speed up that section, and I'm going to explain what it actually is. So let's get started with this first part, get the sales order. This one is very simple. And that's it, right? So now we have the sales order. So now we want to generate the POs for items where we don't have enough to fulfill the order. So how do we actually do that? We identify the products and components that inventory is required. So we're going to loop through each product. So let's actually kind of just code this out. Okay, so what we're doing here is we're going through each line item. We're checking to see if we have the inventory required, and if we don't, we add this product to the required inventory list. Make sense? However, we're also going to want to do this for if it's a composite product. So right here, we want to double check that if it's a composite product. So this is only for if it's a non-composite product. And then if it is a composite product, we want to do something a little bit different. There we go. So now if there is a component required, we loop through each of the component required, check to see how much we're actually going to need. Check to see how much we're going to actually need, and then if we don't have enough, we add it to the inventory required list. Real simple. All right. So all this section does is just checks to see which products we're going to need inventory for. Now, we may also want to add the total amount it's going to need, but we'll just redo this a little later. So then down here, we want to get a list of vendors required based on the product list. So what we're actually going to do instead is we're going to make a vendor list equals list. And then in each one of these sections, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go dots add product record dot vendor, and same thing up here. And this is the component required. So then down here, we can distinct this value. So vendor list dot distinct. And so now this is going to give us a list of vendors for this that we need to have a PO for. So now if I'm going to run this, I'm going to click save. I'm going to run this on this sales order. Just to double check that things are going to work, I'm going to click execute. There we go. So now we have the vendor, right? Or technically this would be a vendor list. So what I'm going to do now is we want to do this for each vendor. For each vendor. So for each vendor, and we want to get the inventory required list, and then it's for each product. Now, all we have here is the product required, right, which is the ID. So it might actually make sense for us to include the number of components. So we're going to, or the number that we actually need to fulfill the order. So we're going to go back up to here, and rather than adding just the product ID, what we're going to do is we're going to create a product map. So now that we've added in the required amount and the product, so we're doing this for each product. Now, first thing we should always do here is let's get the product required. So we just want to make sure that we're doing this for the right vendor. So assuming it's for the right vendor, then we want to create a line item. So if comms that we're doing this for each component, we don't need to do that anymore. And then calculate number for each item. We actually already have that. That's this required amount right here. So what we want to do is create the PO line items to fulfill the order. So now that we've created all the line items here, by the way, this may have been missed in the speed up, but I've added the sales order line item up here as well into this map because we want the sales order line item to match up over here. So I just pass it through. So now we want to create the PO. So I'm going to go down and add a record. Purchase order, so I'm going to say, hey, we want this date issued X, the PO number X. Related sales order is this. Status, vendor. I'm not going to put in the work orders yet. But we also know in a purchase order, we have line items. So date issued, we'll say it's today, Zoho.current date. The PO number, I'm going to leave that blank. The related sales order, we're going to use this sales order ID right up here. The status is draft. And then the vendor is the vendor right here. I'm going to click save. Great, that works. I'm actually going to make the PO number the same as this here. And now, if you remember from the previous video, we had this push to Zoho inventory function for a PO. So push purchase order to Zoho inventory. We can do that right here. This app dot, and we want to use this purchase order dot ID dot to long. So all this function up to this point just creates the purchase order, the purchase orders that are going to be required for the work order to be fulfilled. I'm just going to tab this out just for ease. Down here is where we actually want to create the work orders, right? So to create a work order line item, we want to do this for each sales order line item. Now we've got the sales order up here. So we're going to go for each, there we go. So for each sales order line item, we want to get the product info. And then we want to get the PO line item based on the sales order line item, right? So PO line item equals purchase order line item, where the sales order line item equals line item dot ID. From here, we can actually create the row for the work order line items. Now, before I forgot to do the work order line item collection equals collection. And now here we can go work order. And now we can actually add all the information. So the work order line item, we're going to start with the sales order. Start with the products, which is equal to this. And there we go. So now we've created the work order line items. Actually, we're going to do the pick list line items on a future video. Next video. So now down here, we want to create the work order. And this is the last easiest part, or the second last easiest part. So we're going to go to work orders. I'm not going to do calculated assembly time. We're going to do purchase orders, sales orders, status, work order number. I'm going to insert those. So the purchase orders are all these purchase orders up here that we've created for each vendor. All right. So I'm actually going to go down here or up here. I'm going to make a PO list equals list. There we go. So the purchase orders is this PO list. The sales order is this right up here. The status for the work order is, we're going to start it as in queue. And then the work order number, I'm just going to make this work order. And then finally, we need the assembly line items equals is this right here. And then finally, we can update the purchase order and sales order line items. Now, I believe for the purchase order, we already have the sales order line items. So it's only on the sales order we need to link the purchase order line item. So sales order line items, we need to link this up to the sales order. And to do that, we're just going to go ahead and use this sales order up here. I'm just going to grab it as a new thing. So sales order, we're going to call this one updated sales order, and we're going to go for each. So for each line item in the updated sales order line items, we're going to search for PO line items equals purchase order line items, where the sales order line items equals line item dot ID. And we want to do the same thing with the work order one right up here, which is right here. And we're already including the sales order line items in here. Hold on. Sales order line items. So we want to do the same thing with work order line item equals. There we go. Let's click save. And let's run a test. And for something as long as complicated as this is 100-something lines, you should expect that there's going to be errors. So I hope there isn't. And I did anticipate that we're not going to have so many errors, but let's run it and see what happens. That's a bad sign, or could be a good sign. Let's go into all work orders. Boom, we've got our composite item with the amount that needs to be assembled. It's been not started. We've got a sales order and a purchase order. Now let's check to see if that purchase order, all purchase orders, that's one from today. I can open it up, click edit. we've got this one item in this component. Let's just check the products. So we're doing a composite item. We have -1 available inventory. And if I open it up, we have 1 demo and then 6 tests that we need. And if I go to tests, we have lots of inventory, but we don't have any for demo. So that makes sense that the purchase order that it created was only for the one item, right? It's marked as issued. The only thing I need to do is include this in the purchase order so we know what it's related to. So I'm just going to add this to do at the bottom here for the next video, to do in next video. So again, it looks really complicated, but all we're trying to do is just link the records. Now, so this video, what we did is we've generated a work order right here. In the next video, we're going to be doing something to keep inventory up to date so that as things get shipped, it updates the available inventory and the allocated inventory, as well as we're going to generate some code that's going to update work orders or sales orders, the status. We're finally going to do something with the status when POs are received. So I hope you found this video helpful. I will see you in the next video.